So today, our mission is to explore how these things called experiments of nature and also some really insightful animal studies help us sort of unpack wild development and behavior.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these two different research paths actually complement each other quite well.
How so?
Well, when we talk about experiments of nature, we're basically looking at real life situations that, just through circumstance, not by design.
Right.
They give us these unique glimpses into fundamental developmental processes.
Okay.
And then animal studies, well, they let us set up more controlled environments. We can investigate things in ways that just wouldn't be ethical or even possible with people.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's dive a bit deeper then into this experiments of nature idea. What sort of situations are we actually talking about?
Think of it like life itself sometimes sets up a scenario, almost like an accidental experiment, that researchers can then study.
Okay.
A really powerful example, though, quite tragic, is the children adopted from Romanian orphanages back in the late 20th century.
Ah, yes, I've heard about that. It sounded like incredibly difficult circumstances. Can you sort of paint a picture of what those early environments were like?
Yeah, the conditions in many of those state-run places were severely deprived. It's incredibly tough.
How so?
You often had huge numbers of infants and very, very few caregivers. Sometimes, one person trying to look after maybe 10, even 20 babies.
Wow, that's hard to imagine.
It is. And the children, they often spent nearly all their time just lying in cribs. Very little sensory input, hardly any consistent nurturing interaction with adults.
So what did that mean for their development? What did researchers actually see?
Well, sadly, a whole range of significant problems.
Yeah.
Many kids really struggled with social competence, interacting with others, forming healthy attachments. Behavioral issues were common too, and delays, physical growth, cognitive development.
Right.
Some even showed what's called failure to thrive. Basically, stunted physical growth, even if
Yeah.
they got enough food, likely because of that lack of emotional and social input.
That's just heartbreaking. So where does the experiment of nature part come in? How did we learn from this awful situation?
The key insights really came when some of these children who'd experienced this profound early neglect were adopted by families elsewhere.
Okay.
Researchers followed them,
Yeah.
and they found something quite remarkable. Kids who were placed in stable, nurturing foster or adoptive homes before around 20 months of age.
Before 20 months.
Yeah, that seemed to be a crucial window. Those kids often showed a striking ability to recover. By the time they were adolescents, many were functioning pretty well. Yeah. It just highlighted the incredibly powerful positive impact of getting into a supportive environment early on. This situation, terrible as it was, inadvertently let us see the effects of severe early deprivation, but also the potential for recovery with intervention.
So that timing, getting out before 20 months, that was really the key factor.
It seems so. It strongly suggests those early years are a particularly sensitive period for development, especially for social and emotional growth.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean the early deprivation left no marks at all for some,
Right.
but the extent to which many could catch up really underlines the brain's capacity for change, neuroplasticity, we call it, and just how vital those early experiences are. The brain is wiring itself up so rapidly then, based on what it encounters.
Yeah.
Severe deprivation disrupts that whole process, affecting areas crucial for social skills, emotional control.
That really brings it home how critical that early environment is. Okay, now you also mentioned another kind of experiment of nature, twin and adoption studies. How do they fit in?
Right, so twin and adoption studies tackle the nature-nurture question from a slightly different angle.
Yep.
They leverage the natural variations we see in families, how genetically related people are, and whether they share the same home environment or not.
So comparing twins or adopted kids with their biological and adoptive parents.
Exactly. By comparing, say, identical twins who have virtually the same genes with fraternal twins who share about half like regular siblings,
Right.
or by looking at how similar adopted children are to their biological parents versus their adoptive ones, researchers can estimate what's called heritability. Basically, how much of the variation we see in a trait, like intelligence or personality, seems to be down to genetic differences within a population.
And what's the general finding from those studies for things like cognitive abilities, personality?
Well, they consistently show a pretty significant genetic influence. Heritability estimates for many of these traits often land somewhere between, say, 30% and 60% when looking at parent-child resemblance.
30 to 60%. So genes definitely play a substantial role.
They do. But it's really important to understand what heritability means and what it doesn't mean.
Okay.
It's a population statistic. It tells us about variation within a group, not about how much of one person's trait is genetic. And it doesn't mean a trait is fixed or unchangeable.
Right, because that still leaves a big chunk that isn't accounted for by genes alone.
Precisely. The rest of the variation comes down to non-genetic factors. That includes the environment, obviously how you're raised, your experiences, but also things like just random chance, measurement error in the studies. And what's really interesting is that as the field of behavioral genetics has kind of firmed up the role of heritability, it's actually shifted focus more and more towards understanding those non-genetic influences.
So looking more at the nurture side and how it interacts with nature.
Exactly.
Okay.
Looking at specific environmental things like parenting styles, socioeconomic factors, and crucially, how our specific genetic predispositions interact with the specific environments we find ourselves in. That's genotype-environment interaction.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think of a child maybe with a genetic leaning towards being athletic. In a family or school that really encourages sports, provides opportunities, that potential might blossom, right?
Yeah.
But in an environment with few chances for physical activity, that same genetic predisposition might not be nearly as obvious in how the child develops. The environment shapes how the genes are expressed.
Got it. So these experiments of nature, whether it's these tough real-world cases or just the natural variations in families, they both really highlight this complex dance between what we inherit and what we experience.
That's a good way to put it, a complex dance.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit now and talk about animal studies. What can we learn about ourselves, about human development, by looking at animals?
Animal studies are incredibly valuable because they let us investigate fundamental aspects of development in a much more controlled manner.
Right, things you just couldn't ethically do with humans?
Exactly. Or things that are just too complex to easily isolate in human lives. And one of the real landmark studies here, just absolutely foundational, is Harry Harlow's work with rhesus monkeys back in the mid-20th century.
Oh, yeah, the surrogate mothers, right? I think I vaguely remember seeing pictures. What exactly did Harlow do?
So Harlow separated infant rhesus monkeys from their biological mothers shortly after birth and raised them with two artificial surrogate mothers.
Okay.
One surrogate was just a bare wire mesh frame, but it had a feeding bottle attached, so it provided milk
It's
nourishment.
a basic need.
Right. The other surrogate was also made of wire, but it was covered in soft terry cloth. It felt comforting to touch, but it didn't offer any food.
Okay, wire mom with food, cloth mom with no food. And what happened? How did the baby monkeys react?
Well, the finding was pretty revolutionary for its time. It really flew in the face of the dominant idea then, which was mostly based on Freudian psychoanalysis and behaviorism, that infants primarily bond with whoever satisfies their basic physical needs, especially hunger.
So they thought the monkeys would prefer the wire mother because she had the food.
That was the expectation. But Harlow found the complete opposite. The infant monkeys spent overwhelmingly more time clinging to the soft cloth mother.
Even though she didn't have the food.
Even though she didn't have the food, they'd only scurry over to the wire mother for quick feeds and then immediately go back to the cloth mother for comfort and security.
Wow. That's really striking. So it wasn't just about getting fed.
Not at all. Harlow's work gave us this powerful evidence for something he called contact comfort.
Contact comfort.
Yeah, that feeling of warmth, security, safety you get from physical touch and closeness. His research showed this is a fundamental need, maybe even more powerful in forming those early bonds than just getting food.
And how did that ripple outwards? How did it change how we think about human development?
It had a massive impact. It was hugely influential on attachment theory, particularly the work of John Bowlby and later Mary Ainsworth. It strongly supported Bowlby's idea that the main caregiver is much more than just a food dispenser. They become a secure base.
A secure base.
Yeah, a source of safety and security. When an infant feels that security, feels they have that safe haven to return to, it actually gives them the confidence to go out and explore the world.
Okay. So feeling safe lets you be brave.
In a way, yes. It fosters independence, learning, competence. And these early attachment experiences, they do something else too. They start to inform the child about their own value, like, am I worthy of care? And about whether other people are generally reliable and trustworthy.
So it shapes their view of themselves and others.
Exactly. Through these interactions, kids develop what Bowlby called internal working models. Think of them as like mental blueprints or expectations about relationships based on those very first experiences with caregivers.
So these aren't just about feeling cozy as a baby. They have really long-lasting effects on relationships later on.
That's the core idea, yes.
Mm.
The quality of that first attachment relationship is thought to shape these internal working models, which then influence how we approach and behave in relationships,
Hmm.
friendships, romantic partnerships, all through our lives.
It's really fascinating how these different research paths, looking at these unique, sometimes difficult human situations and these carefully controlled animal studies, they seem to converge, don't they?
They really do.
They both point to this fundamental importance of early experiences and the need for, wow, more than just keeping the body alive for healthy development.
Precisely. The experiments of nature, like the Romanian orphanages, they dramatically show the impact, both negative and positive, of the early environment and the potential for resilience.
Hmm.
While the animal studies, like Harlow's, help us zero in on some of the core ingredients needed for that healthy development, like contact comfort being essential for secure attachment.
So wrapping this up then, our deep dive today, it's really shown us a couple of key things. From the Romanian orphanage studies, we see just how powerful and long-lasting the effects of early environmental deprivation can be,
Absolutely.
but also, crucially, the potential for real positive change if there's timely, supportive intervention.
Right. That window of opportunity.
And then from Harlow's monkeys, we get this fundamental insight that development isn't just about food and shelter. That need for contact comfort, for closeness, is absolutely vital for forming secure attachments.
Couldn't have said it better.
Mm.
These different lines of evidence really underscore just how profoundly our early environment shapes who we become.
It definitely leaves us with some things to think about for you, the listener, as well. How do these insights from animal studies, especially about contact comfort, shape how we think about human parenting today?
Yeah. What does it mean for practices, for policies?
And also thinking about the impact of those early environments. What are the potential long-term societal consequences if many children experience significant adversity early in life?
Big questions.
Yeah.
It all points back to that really intricate interplay between our biological predispositions, our nature, and the experiences that shape us, our nurture. These kinds of studies, they give us invaluable glimpses into those foundational elements.
Absolutely. We really encourage you to maybe explore concepts like attachment theory further or look into the ongoing research on early childhood development. There's so much more there.
Definitely worth digging into.